Tuesday nights used to be nothing special for me. The TV was throwing late-night chatter across the living room, the kind of jokes that barely deserved the laugh track, and I was slouched in my boxers with an empty beer bottle sweating on the nightstand. Next door, Mrs. Bauer's little mutt was barking like the world was ending, though around here that just meant a raccoon had blinked in the wrong direction. Everything felt regular, ordinary, until the phone rang. The time glowed on the cable box, 11:47 p.m. I still remember that number like a brand. Unknown caller, Northeast area code. Could have been a client. Could have been another spammer asking if I'd thought about extending my car warranty. What it was instead was the first crack in the life I thought I had. I answered, voice still rough from half sleep. A man introduced himself, said, "This is Richard Caldwell from Nexus Tech. Is Leia feeling all right? She wasn't at tonight's strategic planning session, and we've got the big client presentation tomorrow morning." Right then, my chest turned to ice. It wasn't some spooky premonition, nothing mystical, just cold math. My wife was supposed to be in Boston at a corporate retreat. If her boss was calling me at almost midnight asking where she was, then the story I'd been fed wasn't lining up. I forced my tone steady. I said, "She mentioned earlier she wasn't feeling too hot, probably sleeping it off. You know how those hotel air conditioners are." He bought it easy enough, told me she needed to call him first thing in the morning, then hung up. I stayed frozen with the cordless still buzzing in my hand, staring at the TV, without hearing a word. After a while, I got up and walked to our bedroom, checking the places she'd never expect me to check. Passport, still tucked in her top drawer under scarves she swore were investments. Jewellery, still here. Emergency credit card, the one we kept taped behind the rail, still here too. She hadn't packed for a getaway. Whatever this was, it wasn't a permanent escape. Then my phone buzzed with a text. "Conference is going great. Learning so much. Might extend the stay another day or two. Love you." I read it 3 times. Those exclamation points stabbed at me. She was pretending to be buried in workshops while her boss was out here calling strangers trying to track her down. I typed back, "Sounds productive. Richard called looking for you. I told him you were sick." Almost instantly she replied, "Oh no, I forgot to tell him I was taking a personal day. Thanks for covering. You're the bell." The lies rolled smooth, like butter off a hot knife. I wandered into the kitchen, flipped on the fluorescent light. We'd painted those walls yellow 5 years back, because she swore it made mornings brighter. That night they looked sickly, like old fruit you shouldn't touch. I opened my laptop at the wobbly chair, logged into Facebook. Leia never shared much online, but Sloane, her best friend, documented everything. 10 minutes of scrolling and I found it. A picture posted 6 hours earlier. Sloane and Leia grinning at a beachfront bar, glasses raised high. Location tag, Sunset Grill, Cape Cod. Not Boston, not a corporate retreat. Cape Cod. I screenshotted it and leaned back until the chair creaked like it wanted to warn me. I scrolled more. Leia in a boutique, Leia at a restaurant, Leia on a boat with strangers. And then I saw him. Not in focus, not front and centre, just edges of him in the background. A tall figure in tailored clothes, the type that costs more than my truck note. Sharp haircut, expensive smile, the kind of man she used to date before me, back when I still thought love was enough to outweigh status. I sat there staring at that cropped shoulder and jawline, feeling something heavy and cold settle into my gut. It wasn't just a girls' weekend she'd lied about to avoid an argument. It was bigger, calculated. The fake conference, the text messages, the carefully spun stories. And for the first time, suspicion hardened into certainty. The basement's always been my spot. Concrete walls, a workbench that smells like sawdust and motor oil, and an old recliner I dragged home off a demolition site. Half workshop, half bunker. That night I went down there with a fresh beer and my laptop, telling myself if Leia wanted to play games, then I needed to learn the rules. I started simple, logged into our joint checking. 3 days back she'd pulled out $800 in cash. Same day, the credit card showed charges at a gas station in Hartford, a restaurant in Providence, and then a hotel in Hyannis, Cape Cod. Not Boston, not anywhere close, dear. The hotel stung the most. Ocean View Resort. I looked it up online. Stock photos of sunsets, couples spa packages, romantic dinners with champagne by candlelight. Definitely not the kind of place you take for strategic planning. I took screenshots, printed receipts, shoved them in a folder I labelled insurance. That word looked right on the tab. Next I logged into the family cell plan. Why would I ever care before? Trust used to mean something in my house, but there it was. Dozens of calls to a number I didn't recognise. Late at night, on lunch breaks, sometimes twice in the same hour, I ran a reverse search. A name popped up. Carter Hale. I googled him. Regional sales director, recently divorced, downtown condo, LinkedIn pictures of him in press suits, handshakes at conferences, his Facebook, a highlight reel of expensive restaurants, trips to the Cape, and him cheesing on a sailboat. And yeah, several of those backdrops looked real familiar. Same places Sloane had been tagging Laia. The more I clicked, the less my hands shook. Fear was burning off, replaced by something colder. By morning, I was ready for fresh coffee and fresh intel. Vivian's Pet Paradise opened at 7 sharp, and Viv was always there early, feeding birds and scrubbing tanks. She's been running that shop longer than I've been married, and she knows everything that happens in this town. When I walked in, bell jingling overhead, she looked up from a parrot cage and squinted at me like she could read the mess written across my face. "Eli Barnes, you're up early. Coffee's fresh if you want some." I poured a cup, leaned on the counter, tried to play it casual. I said, "Laia's at some work retreat in Boston. Big corporate deal." Viv paused, wiping her hands. "That's so funny. I could have sworn I saw her car parked at the train station Monday night." The train station. Last stop before Hartford. My stomach turned, but I nodded like it was nothing. "Probably someone with the same model," I said. She studied me, then shrugged. "Maybe." She bent back to her birds, but her voice carried a note. "I see more than I say." When I got home, I sat again in the basement, staring at Carter's perfect smile on my screen. This wasn't panic anymore. This was prep. Every screenshot, every transaction, every witness, it was all bricks, and I was building a wall around myself. That night, just as I was saving another file, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Mick. "You up?" "Something weird happened at the Anchor tonight." I texted back, "Yeah, what happened?" The phone rang almost before I hit send. Mick's voice was low, serious. "Man, folks at the bar were talking loud about your wife saying Laia finally living her best life." And that was the moment suspicion turned into proof in my mind. The rusty Anchor always smelled like old beer and fried catfish, and the floor was sticky no matter what night you showed up. Mick worked the door there 3 nights a week, so I slid in like usual, except this time it felt like everyone's eyes tracked me just a second too long. The jukebox was low, some dusty R&B ballad dragging its feet through the speakers, but the chatter carried over it like gossip always does in a small town. I nursed a whiskey, tried not to flinch when I caught Mandy's voice. She was Laia's girl from work, the type who thought every marriage was a prison sentence and every husband a warden. I heard her laughing too loud, telling anybody within reach that Laia finally living her best life, she deserved more than being stuck with some man who never leaves town. Folks chuckled, raised glasses, and I sat there with my jaw tight, tasting metal instead of liquor. I didn't say a word, just listened. Every time Mandy opened her mouth, she poured gasoline on the fire, and people around her soaked it up. My business had turned into public entertainment. That was the moment I knew keeping quiet wasn't an option. If they were going to turn my life into a story, I was going to be the one writing the ending. Back home, I spread everything I'd collected across the basement workbench. Receipts, screenshots, phone records. It already looked airtight, but I wanted undeniable, the kind of evidence you could lay on a table and watch somebody crumble under. That's when I thought of Neptune's table. Carter had been tagged there before, some overpriced seafood joint right on the Cape, romantic lighting, white tablecloths, oysters priced like rent. Exactly the type of place he'd bring Laia to feel fancy. So I called, put on my nicest voice, told the hostess I wanted to surprise my wife, asked if she happened to be dining with them tonight. She didn't even blink, said, "Yes, Mrs. Barnes is here, table 12, just ordered appetizers with her companion. Want me to send champagne over?" I hung up before my voice cracked. Later, I sat on Viv's porch with a mug of her too-strong coffee, while cicadas screamed in the trees. She studied me like she was deciding how much truth I could carry. I told her about the receipts, about the call to the restaurant. She shook her head slow and said, "Eli, people like that, they think lies make them invisible, but folks always notice patterns changing. You ain't crazy. Just careful." When I met Mick after his shift, we laid it all out in the cab of his truck. He asked me what the plan was, and I told him I needed to see her face when she realized she'd been caught. He didn't argue, just said, "Then let's drive." The highway to Cape Cod was dark, only the hum of tyres and the occasional green road sign breaking the silence. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd hold my ground. My hands shook, but my voice inside stayed steady. By the time we crossed the bridge, I wasn't so scared anymore, just ready. We found the restaurant easy, valet lights glowing soft against the ocean breeze. I spotted them through the wide front window before we even parked. Table 12, right where the hostess said. Leia wore the expensive dress I'd found tucked in her closet, hair done in a way I hadn't seen in years. Carter leaned across the table, his hand wrapped over hers, both of them laughing like the world had just handed them a free future. I stared, my heart knocking against my ribs, watching the woman I married look happier with him than she'd looked with me in years. Then I opened the truck door and walked toward the entrance. The hostess didn't even blink when I told her I was surprising my wife. She smiled like this was the sweetest thing she'd seen all night and led me across the dining room. My boots felt too loud on that polished wood floor, every step echoing over the soft jazz playing from overhead speakers. Couples leaned close over oysters and white wine, the room smelling like butter and salt. Nobody looked up, until I did. 10 feet away, table 12, Carter had his back to me, but I knew it was him. The cut of the suit, the way he leaned in like he owned the air around him. Leia's face was the one that did me in. She spotted me before he did, and the colour drained so fast I thought she might pass out right there. The smile froze, her hand jerked back from his, and her whole body stiffened like I'd just dragged her ghost out of the floor. I stopped beside the table, steady as I could manage, though my heart was doing overtime. I said, "Hey honey, how's the conference going?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. No sound coming out. Carter turned confused, his jaw tightening when he saw me standing there. He said, "I think there's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake, Bupul," I told him, keeping my voice even. "You must be Carter. I'm Eli Barnes, Leia's husband." The words hit like glass shattering in slow motion. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The background jazz kept playing, but you could hear the whisper of knives scraping plates as heads turned. Carter stood taller than me, shoulders broad, his cologne cutting through the seafood. He tried to play calm. "Look, I think you should leave. This isn't the time or place." I didn't move an inch. "The time is fine. The place is perfect. Matter of fact, it's where my wife spends our money on romantic dinners with her boyfriend." I pulled my phone from my pocket, laid it on the table like an ace in a card game. The screen lit up with screenshots. Hotel receipts, call logs, Sloane's photos. I slid them toward Leia. I know everything. The Ocean View Resort, the late-night calls, the shopping trips, every dollar, every lie. I've got a whole folder of it. Leia's hands shook as she looked down, tears pressing at the edges of her eyes. She whispered, "Eli, please, not here." "Why not here?" I cut her off. "Weren't you worried about being seen when you posted up in restaurants and hotel lobbies? Now you embarrassed? Worried what people think?" The whispering around us thickened. Somebody pulled out a phone, red light blinking. The room felt tilted, like the air had thinned out. Carter shifted beside her, jaw clenched, but his eyes darted to the phone, the receipts, and I could see his confidence leaking. I leaned in just enough to keep my voice low but sharp. "Here's what's going to happen. You two are going to finish this dinner I apparently paid for. Then you're going to drive home tonight. And Carter, if I ever see you near my house again, we're going to have a very different conversation." He swallowed hard but didn't say a word. Leia just stared at the papers, pale and small in that expensive dress. I picked up my phone, pocketed it, and turned without another glance. Behind me I heard the clink of glasses, the shuffle of chairs, voices rising into low gossip. The jazz finally cut out mid-song, replaced by silence heavy enough to make every eye in that room feel like a spotlight. Outside, Mick leaned against the truck, phone in his hand, camera still recording. He gave me a slow nod. "Got it all," he said. "Every damn word." We drove back in near silence, headlights carving through the dark. I sat awake until morning at the kitchen table, folder of evidence spread in front of me like blueprints. No sleep, just planning. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't the same man who had walked into that restaurant. And at 3:17 a.m., just like I knew she would, Leia's car pulled into the driveway. She was home, and there was no running from what came next. She came through the door quiet, like she thought maybe I'd already be asleep. But the lights in the kitchen were on, the coffee was fresh in the pot, and I was sitting there at the table with a folder spread wide like evidence in a courtroom. She froze in the doorway, hair pinned back like the night hadn't even happened, makeup smudged at the corners. Didn't bother with greetings. I just asked, "How long?" She dropped her purse on the counter, eyes darting everywhere but me. "Eli." "Don't Eli me. How long's it been going on?" Her mouth worked like she was chewing on silence. Finally she said, "You didn't see it. I felt invisible, like I was disappearing in my own house." That hit different. Not because I believed it, but because she said it like a fact. She pulled out a chair and sat, the wood groaning under her weight. The kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled. Wind rattled the kitchen window in its frame. I slid the receipts across the table. Ocean View Resort, Victoria's Secret $347, gas stations, restaurants, all on our money. And this, I opened the folder further, showing printed texts. Words circled in red. Trapped. Unhappy. Deserve better. Her hand shook as she flipped through them, eyes filling up. "I was angry when I wrote those things. You don't understand." "No," I cut her off. "I understand perfectly. You felt unseen, so instead of talking to me, you wrote love notes to Carter and let him wine and dine you on my dime. You planned weekends, you bought dresses for him, not me. Tell me again how invisible you felt." She pressed her palms to her face, sobbing quietly. For a second, the man I used to be wanted to reach across that table, hold her, tell her it would be fine. But that man had been buried at table 12 when I watched her smile at another man like he was the center of her world. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered. "How did you mean for it to happen? Was there some version where you just disappear one morning and leave me holding a mortgage and a dog that doesn't even exist? Was that the plan?" She shook her head. "I just needed to be seen. Carter. He made me feel alive again, not like—" She looked up, eyes red. "Not like sitting in front of the TV with you every night, eating dinner in shares, going to bed like roommates. That's not a marriage, Eli." Her words cut, but they didn't shake me. I'd been replaying every meal, every silence, every sideways glance for weeks now. Maybe she was right that things weren't perfect. But she was dead wrong if she thought betrayal was the cure. I closed the folder, slow and deliberate. This isn't about roommates. This is about lying. Every damn day, to me, to your boss, to yourself. She reached across the table, fingertips grazing the folder. "Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can't fix this." My voice was flat, cold, and "you broke it and then you danced on the pieces. You don't come back from that." Silence hung heavy. The chair creaked as I leaned back. My mind was already moving past her tears, past her excuses. Divorce lawyer, asset protection, lock the house down, build my case brick by brick like every house I'd ever put together. Eventually she stood, wiping her face with her sleeve. She scribbled something on a scrap of paper, left it on the table by the cold coffee pot, and walked upstairs without another word. When I finally picked it up, it was 2 words written in shaky ink. "I'm sorry. It didn't mean a damn thing." That night, while she slept in the guest room, I sat in the basement, scanning every page into digital files. When I was done, I zipped them into a folder and typed in a number I'd found earlier. Carter's wife, Patrice. If anyone deserved to know the truth as much as me, it was her. I hit send. When Patrice Hale called me, her voice was calm in a way that told me she'd already cried all her tears. She said she'd gotten my message, that she'd gone through the screenshots and receipts, and for a moment the line was nothing but her breathing. Then she said, "I knew something was off. I didn't have proof. You gave me proof." I told her I was sorry she had to find out like this. She cut me off, sharp. "Don't be sorry. Be glad. Men like Carter count on women like me to keep doubting ourselves, to keep second-guessing. Now I know." We spoke for nearly an hour. I laid out the timeline, the calls, the hotel charges. She absorbed every detail, her voice steady but laced with steel. By the time we hung up, I realized I wasn't just venting. I'd found an ally. The very next morning, the dominoes started to fall. Patrice worked in finance. She had contacts, real ones, the kind who picked up the phone when she called. By noon, she'd forwarded copies of Carter's messages and hotel receipts to his company's HR department. By 3, she'd quietly informed 2 of his biggest clients about his ethical concerns. By evening, his phone must have been lighting up like a Christmas tree, because my own buzzed with messages from Mick saying, "Word is, Carter's on thin ice, people talking." I sat in my basement, the glow of the laptop painting the concrete walls, listening to the rhythm of emails sending, the quiet ping of new notifications. Every whoosh of an outgoing message felt like a nail in the coffin. It didn't stop there. Patrice let me know later that night that she'd also filed for divorce. Straight up, no hesitation. She said, "I'm not about to let him take me down with him. If he thought he could juggle 2 women, he's about to find out what happens when both drop him at once." By the end of the week, Carter's professional life was crumbling. The sailboat pictures, the curated lifestyle. It all looked cheap now that word spread. He was a liar who burned his own career for a fling. Clients started backing away. Some cut ties altogether. Leia noticed. She came into the kitchen one evening, eyes wide, holding her phone like it was evidence of a crime. "Do you know what's happening to Carter? His company might suspend him. His wife is leaving him. People are saying..." I cut her off. "People are saying the truth. That's all." She stared at me like she couldn't decide if I was the man she'd married, or someone new entirely. Maybe I was both. And here's the thing, I should have felt triumphant. Carter falling apart was the exact justice I'd wanted. But sitting there, hearing the wind whistle through the loose kitchen window frame, I didn't feel peace. I felt empty. The damage was done. Trust wasn't something you rebuild with court papers and ruined reputations. 2 nights later, Leia made her move. She hired an attorney, a slick one, Marquis Webb. Word around town was he specialised in maximising settlements, especially for cheating spouses looking to spin their story. When the first letter came, my lawyer laid it flat on his desk and read it twice, slow. Marquis claimed the marriage had broken down not because of adultery, but because of my emotional neglect. He wrote that my long hours, my silence at the dinner table, my failure to see my wife had pushed her toward Carter. They weren't calling her affair the cause, they were calling it a symptom. And the kicker? He wanted half the house. I sat there staring at the papers, my pulse steady but my jaw locked tight. They weren't just trying to rewrite history, they were trying to steal the roof over my head. The war had just moved to a new battlefield. Tom Mitchell's office smelled like old books and stale coffee, the kind of place where paper lived longer than people. I sat across from him while he flipped through the folder I'd been building for weeks, receipts, screenshots, call logs, photos. He nodded slowly, lips pursed. "You've done half my job for me," he said. "Now we make it official. We file for divorce, we file for protection of the property, and we make sure her lawyer can't spin this into neglect." But Marquis Webb had already moved first. His countersuit landed like a brick. Claims of emotional neglect, long hours on job amour, site support, dinners in silence. According to Webb, I hadn't driven Leia into Carter's arms. No, I'd pushed her there with my absence. And for that she deserved half of everything. The house, the savings, even part of my business. Tom leaned forward. "He's going to try to drag you into the mud. We counter with evidence, not emotion, evidence." He tapped the folder like it was holy scripture. So I started collecting people. Viv from the pet shop, who remembered Leia asking about dog boarding when we never had a dog. Mrs. Bowers, who saw Carter's car pulling into our driveway while I was at work. Danny at the gas station, who remembered Carter paying for Leia's gas late at night. And Mick, my brother in all but blood, who'd heard Mandy bragging at the Anchor about Leia finally living her best life. Every witness was another nail. Every detail chipped away at the story Marquis wanted to tell. I remember the sounds most. Tom's shoes clicking down the courthouse hallway, the thud of document packets stamped with the clerk's seal, the shuffle of copies stacked higher than my patience. Paper warfare. That's what it was. My marriage had already died in a restaurant by the ocean. Now we were burying it with exhibits and affidavits. At night, Mick and I sat on my porch, cold beer sweating in our hands. He said, "This ain't about morals anymore, Eli. Not about who's right or wrong in love. This is about justice, plain and simple. You don't let someone steal 8 years of your life and half your house without making them bleed for it." He was right. The fire in me wasn't about saving what was gone. It was about making sure the story ended on my terms. Then Tom called. His voice carried that same careful tone doctors use before bad news. Marky filed a witness list today, he said. He's calling Patrice Hale. My stomach clenched. Patrice, my ally, Carter's betrayed wife, was about to be pulled into the centre ring, and if she faltered, my whole case could crack open. Leia always did know how to put on a show. Within a week of the countersuit, her voice was everywhere. Through Mandy at the anchor, through Sloane's endless posts, through whispers carried faster than truth. She painted herself as the one betrayed, the wife, abandoned by a husband who worked too long, who never looked at her anymore. I scrolled through Sloane's feed one night and saw a picture of Leia holding a wine glass, smile tilted just right, captioned, "Some men don't know what they have until it's gone." The comments were full of sympathy. Her army was forming. Marquis used it like ammunition. He pulled affidavits from neighbours who'd seen me working late, heard my truck pull in after midnight, noticed how quiet our house always was. In his hands, my hard hours and tired silences turned into evidence of emotional neglect. I sat in Tom Mitchell's office, jaw locked, while he read them aloud. Each line tried to cut me down, not for what I'd done, but for what I hadn't. Then came the twist. Tom slid another document across his desk, brows knitted. "She's claiming you've shown aggressive behaviour," he said carefully. "According to this, Mandy and Sloane have both witnessed incidents where you raised your voice, slammed doors, intimidated her." I barked out a laugh, but it felt hollow. Those women hadn't been in my house more than twice in a year. But the affidavits were there, signed and notarized, lies with letterheads. That night I sat in my basement with the security feeds pulled up, listening to old recordings. On my screen, a video from 2 months back showed Leia laughing in the kitchen, phone in hand, telling Carter she'd played Eli like a stone wall. Her face in that frame, bright, alive, not broken, was the truth. I clipped it, labelled it, filed it with the rest. Every time she tried to draw herself as a victim, I countered with receipts. Still, it was clear. This wasn't going to be clean. This was going to be fire, smoke, and ash. If she was ready to drag me through the mud, then I had no choice but to lace up boots and wade in. Close to midnight, as I sat writing notes for Tom, the security app pinged on my phone. Motion detected. I pulled up the feed and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the porch, half-shadowed, facing the door. Not Leia, not Carter. Tall, still, hands buried in pockets. The camera's infrared cast their outline in eerie white. They didn't knock, didn't move, just stood there for nearly a minute before walking back into the dark. I replayed the footage twice, heart thudding like a hammer. Whoever it was, they weren't random, they knew where to find me, and they weren't finished. The figure on the porch wouldn't leave my head. The footage replayed in loops while I sat hunched over the glow of my laptop, digging deeper into the web that had wrapped around my life. Carter was bad enough, Leia's betrayal was worse. But the longer I stared at bank records and message threads, the more it felt like someone else was pulling strings. I started mapping their contacts, Carter's LinkedIn network, Leia's work emails I'd backed up months ago, Sloane's tagged photos. The same names kept overlapping, like circles tightening on a noose. Sloane wasn't just posting cute beach shots, she was picking up tabs on nights out with money that hadn't come from her salary. Mandy had new jewellery, and I knew Leia's paycheck hadn't grown. Tracing credit card charges, I found receipts where Leia had covered them both. Designer purses, salon trips, things she never brought home. It wasn't friendship, it was recruitment. She had bought herself an echo chamber. Then I saw it. A transfer for $5,000 leaving our joint savings 2 months before the conference. The account number it landed in didn't belong to Carter. It went to someone else, a consulting LLC registered under a name I didn't recognize. On paper, just another shell. But the address linked back to one of Carter's longtime clients, a man with a reputation for shady deals and quiet pressure. The basement was silent except for the click of my mouse and the occasional ping of a new notification. Each sound felt like a warning. I sifted through archived emails, digging out fragments Leia must have thought were long deleted. Half-coded exchanges, phone numbers without names, words like arrangement and cover. At 3 a.m, I found a chain that stopped me cold. A message from Leia to Sloane. He thinks it's just about Carter, but it's bigger than that. Don't worry, everything's handled. I leaned back, the chair groaning under me. Bigger than Carter, bigger than an affair. The wind outside hissed against the siding, and I thought I heard footsteps on the gravel drive. For a moment I froze, listening, until it was just silence again. Then my phone lit up. Patrice. Her voice was low, urgent. "Eli, we need to talk. I've been digging too, and it's not just love and money. There's another layer. Before I could ask what she meant, she sent a photo. My hand shook as I opened it. Leah wasn't just with Carter. She was sitting across a table from a face I knew too well, a man from my past, a scar I thought had healed years ago. The photo blurred at the edges as my vision tightened. This wasn't just betrayal. This was history coming back for me. Patrice and I became a quiet storm. Every evening, we traded emails and calls like chess moves. She handled the corporate side, using her connections in finance to push documents straight into the inboxes of HR at Carter's firm. I focused on lining up the timelines, receipts, call records, Sloane's photos. Piece by piece, the story became impossible to ignore. The effect was brutal. By Friday, Carter was out. Word spread fast. Terminated for ethics violations, clients dropping contracts overnight. The man who once smiled from glossy brochures now looked like dead weight, too risky to touch. His sailboat posts went dark, his phone calls unanswered. The high ground he had strutted on crumbled beneath him, and I watched the fall like someone replaying a slow-motion accident. For Leah, the fallout hit different. At first, Mandy and Sloane shouted her innocence, painting me as the cold husband who never noticed her glow. But screenshots started leaking. Purses, salon tabs, fancy dinners bought with money that wasn't hers. People did the math, and sympathy dried up quick. Her circle shrank. Folks who'd once toasted to her new freedom stopped returning calls. Even Mandy posted a vague quote about boundaries and went silent. Marcus fought dirty. He pitched a narrative through whispers to a local reporter. Leah was a victim of emotional neglect, of a husband too buried in work to notice his wife's loneliness. For a few days that story flickered on social media. A photo of her in soft light, half crying, half defiant. But Patrice countered with a recorded interview. Calm, precise, surgical, where she laid out the affair, the cover stories, the deception. Reporters ate it up. The truth hit harder than any PR spin. The courthouse hall buzzed like a hive the morning Marquis tried to salvage her case. Lawyers with armfuls of files, reporters clutching notebooks, cameras clicking like insect wings. I heard snippets of broadcasts, Carter's firing, his clients cutting ties, Adelsindus, the betrayal twisting into a public scandal. The sound of keys clattering, flashes bursting, doors slamming shut. It was the noise of reputations collapsing. And me? I should have felt fire in my chest at some blazing satisfaction. Instead, it was ice. Revenge doesn't come warm. It's a cold plate served neat, and it doesn't fill you up. Watching Carter's career disintegrate, watching Leah sit alone with nobody left to shield her, I realized the storm I'd unleashed was quieter than I'd imagined. Less thunder, more vacuum. That night, the papers lay between us on the kitchen table. Divorce papers, crisp, final. Leah signed them, hand steady but eyes empty. She slid the pen back to me, then looked up. "Eli, before I go, I need to tell you something." I didn't answer, just waited. She took a breath. It wasn't just Carter. He was tied up in something darker, something bigger than us, and I think I was being used. Her words hung there, heavy and crooked, like a chandelier swaying after an earthquake. The gavel came down like the final nail in a coffin. The judge's words were clipped, clinical. Leah would walk away with a minor settlement, barely enough to cover her legal fees. The house, the cars, the savings, they stayed mine. Carter didn't even show for the last hearing. His reputation was already ash in the wind. Patrice stood taller than I'd ever seen her, papers in hand, a quiet vindication settling across her face. She'd won her own war, and I knew she'd never look back. On paper, it was victory. But victories don't follow you to bed. Nights stretched longer than I wanted to admit. Some evenings I'd sit in the dark basement, the hum of the fridge in the corner, scrolling through the evidence I no longer needed. Photos, receipts, texts, proof of betrayal, proof of my revenge, and proof of how cold I'd become. Justice had come, but sleep had left. Mick noticed it first. One night after closing the Anchor, the place empty except for the bartender mopping floors, we sat at the end of the bar with 2 sweating glasses of beer. He lit a cigarette he wasn't supposed to, leaned back and said, "You ever think maybe you were better before all this? Like the guy who still believed she loved him?" The jukebox was down to its last lonely track, some forgotten soul record humming low. I stared into the foam trying to find an answer. That guy was a fool, I said. He'd still be chasing shadows, still letting her run circles. I'd rather be this than that. Mick gave me a look, half respect, half pity. Maybe, but fools sleep better. The words stuck with me longer than the taste of the beer. Viv still kept a pot of coffee hot at the pet shop, still offered me a seat by the cages when she saw me dragging. Mrs. Bowers still waved from her porch, her dog barking at my truck like nothing had changed. Life went on, but in every familiar smile, I felt the shadow of what had been burned away. People knew me now as the man who tore his marriage down brick by brick with proof and paper. Nobody called me naive anymore. Nobody called me trusting. Weeks later, I met Sarah. She was a teacher at the elementary school, divorced herself, carrying her own quiet scars. We talked at the grocery store first, then over coffee, then on walks that stretched longer than either of us planned. With her, it wasn't fire or thunder. It was steady, warm, like something built slow enough not to collapse. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I could start over. But peace never walks in without knocking. One evening, I came home to find an envelope on my porch. No return address, just my name scrawled in thick marker. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it one line. They're not all gone. Not everyone who pulls the trigger has fired yet. I read it twice, 3 times, the words blurring like smoke. The war wasn't over, not yet. Months passed and mornings started sounding different. Not like the restless nights I'd lived through, not like the cold silence of a kitchen table covered in evidence. Now it was the low hum of a drill in the other room, Sarah laughing softly as she held a level against the wall, the clatter of tools on hardwood. My house wasn't just a battlefield anymore. It was a home again, piece by piece rebuilt. The radio played soft jazz in the background, sunlight spilling through curtains we picked out together. Outside, the washing machine churned steady, the sound folding into the rhythm of a life finally catching its breath. News about Carter trickled in from time to time. Word was his divorce cleaned him out and the industry blacklisted him. Last I heard, he was fighting for sales at a used car lot, a man with too many suits and nowhere to wear them. Laia had gone quieter. A friend told me she was working as a cashier in the next town over, head down, older than her years. I thought about her sometimes, but the ache was gone. There was no sweetness in the memories, but no bitterness left either, just absence. The neighbourhood changed too. One afternoon, Mrs. Bowers asked me to fix a door that had stuck for years. I brought my drill and a handful of screws, and when it swung smooth again, she patted my shoulder like I was her own son. Small things, but they stitched me back into the fabric of the community. I spent more time in the workshop, the sawdust smell grounding me, the hum of the fridge steady in the corner. Sarah would lean in the doorway sometimes, hair pulled back, asking what I was building. I'd shrug, say, maybe just myself. She'd smile, and I believed her when she said I was doing fine. But the folder still sat on the shelf in my basement. Insurance. The thick stack of screenshots, receipts, all the poison I'd carried like a shield. One quiet evening I pulled it out, flipped through the pages one last time, then closed it for good. I locked it, tucked it deep in a cabinet, and dropped the key into the trash bin with a hollow clink. I sat back, radio humming some old standard, the night calm outside my windows. For the first time in years, my chest wasn't tight. I kept the house. I kept the lessons. I'm done keeping the trash. Life goes on, and I'm building again.